programmes for this Thursday night on BBC One. In a moment, Tomorrow's World. Then at 7:25, Top of the Pops. Tommy Vance introduces the latest hit sounds with Madness, The Stranglers, Slade and John Lennon. At 8:05, Wildlife on One visits the spectacular coral gardens of Australia's Great Barrier Reef.
I promise you, Mr. Matheson, I'll arrange a meeting to be like putty in my hand. Putty, I promise you.
At 8:30, a new series, Partners.
Hello, Diana. It's Rupert. Now, listen, darling. What I want to do...
Putty does have a nasty habit of hardening.
At 9:25, the final episode of The Treachery Game.
If you still involve yourself in this matter, you will find that not only is Mr. Martens of the CIA trying to kill you, but I also.
Question Time is at 10:15, and Kojak at 11:20 rounds off programmes tonight on BBC One. Details in Radio Times.
And now a look at Tomorrow's World.
Good evening. And now, for the first time on British television, the scientific way to cook the Sunday joint. In this case, a nice top side of beef. Now, the first thing you're going to need is a large veterinary hypodermic syringe, which you use to jab the meat full of holes. And into each hole, you place a thermocouple to measure the temperature of the meat at various depths. Well, it's going to take me a little while to do all that, but we've got a joint over here we prepared earlier, and here it is. That's the meat. Now for the oven. First thing you do is drill a hole in the top. Over the hole, you put a strain gauge with a bit of wire dangling through the hole into the oven. And on the end, you guessed it, you hang your joint. Right, while that lot's cooking, you measure the temperature throughout the meat with your thermocouples and monitor any weight loss with the strain gauge over here. Well, actually, your computer next door does all that and displays the results over here. In practice, of course, you don't have to do any of this. The Meat Research Institute here in the West Country has done it all for you. It's all part of a 2-year scientific study to try and find out what most housewives reckon they know already. How to get the very best out of a joint that nowadays many of them can barely afford to buy. Let's see what happens at different oven temperatures. First, the traditional roast in a hot oven at over 220 degrees centigrade, just under regular 7. Our thermocouples measure a temperature near the centre of the joint of 70 degrees centigrade. But the surface is frizzling away at 91.2, and as a result, the joint dehydrates, and the 1.5 kilograms of meat we bought from the butchers shrinks to under 1 kilogram. Now that's over £1 worth of meat lost just in the cooking process. So how can you reduce that weight loss? Researchers here are cooking an identical joint in a very low oven, 160 degrees centigrade, that's regular 3. That may sound far too low, but our thermocouples show the centre of the joint is again cooking around 70 degrees centigrade. But now the surface temperature is only 6 degrees hotter. Compare that to the first joint, where it's 21 degrees hotter. As a result, the strain gauge tells us there's nowhere near that loss of weight. Right, let's get a slice off each and see what they look like. Actually, it would have been enough to cook both of these joints to 60 degrees centigrade and not 70. The weight loss would have been even less then, but the inside would have been red, which is fine for the French, but not for us. At 70 degrees, both these joints are going to be overdone, but that's how the British like it. OK, both joints look all right, but how does the toughness compare? To find out, they take identical sized cubes from the centre of each joint and bite them in a special pair of jaws and measure the force needed to make the teeth just touch. The results show they're just as tender. So what about flavour? Well, most butchers deliberately wrap their joints of beef in a layer of fat, and most people believe that fat improves the flavour of the joint. Well, what they discovered here was that a joint of beef wrapped in fat loses more weight than one without. Another thing to remember too is that it costs the farmer 4 times as much in foodstuffs to produce fat on an animal than lean, so it had better improve the flavour. Here at the Meat Research Institute, they've done hundreds of tests on flavour using that final arbiter, the taste panel. Scores of people like this eat first one sample, then the other, and write down their findings. So, when they compare the taste of meat with fat to meat cooked without fat, is there any difference?
No.
No difference.
No difference.
Just the same.
Just the same.
And there's not much difference between the low and the hot oven taste either, except that the low oven meat is more juicy. So, what they're actually saying here is that if you want the best value and taste from a joint of British beef, cook it without fat at Regulo 3. Just one problem, though. That's not hot enough for your Yorkshire pudding.
Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin by telling you it's very unlikely, because most of you will now be sitting in chairs which can help to cause one of the most expensive of illnesses, back pain. By relaxing with your spine bowed, like mine is at the moment, you could join the 1.5 million people in Britain with bad backs, who cost the country £1,000 million a year in lost production to industry, plus those National Health Service bills. In trying to find an answer, we've seen masses of orthopaedic chairs. So it's hardly surprising that the latest idea, from Norway, suggests going back to square one. They want us to learn to sit all over again. Like this, on a forward-tilted seat with a cushion for your legs, so you neither sit nor stand. Feels a bit odd, rather like a saddle. But before you reject it out of hand, just look at the way children sit, quite naturally. They like leaning back on their heels, which keeps their spine straight, their back muscles relaxed, and it doesn't cramp their stomachs. Hence, this new range of improbable-looking chairs, which recreate for adults, like Fred here, the way young children sit. Doctors in Norway who've tested these chairs claim that because of the slanting seat, the pelvis is rolled forwards so that the vertebrae form a healthy S shape, reducing the strain on both them and their related back muscles. Although the orthopaedic expert in Britain who's seen these chairs is sceptical for anyone over 50, because by that age your joints are just too stiff. But should the under 50s learn to sit in a completely new way if we're going to reduce back pain? Well, it did occur to us when we saw this new British version here that it looked a little familiar. It's got the same gently sloping seat as the Norwegian chairs, and your legs tuck away underneath in a similar way. But you may have a feeling that you've seen it somewhere before, and you have. We discovered this in the British Museum, popular in the Congo as long ago as the early 19th century. So, sitting like this isn't exactly new. Obviously, fashions in how to sit go in 200-year cycles. Whether that also applies to reducing back pain, we'll just have to wait and see.
Come this April, electricity will be costing 5 times more than it did 10 years ago. And yet, back in the late 50s, scientists believed they'd come up with a plentiful source of electrical energy.
Headlines for Harwell. Another spectacular triumph in nuclear research. This is Zeta, Z-E-T-A. Make special note of those initials, for they spell a British scientific achievement without parallel for the benefit of mankind. Experiments have suggested that the deadly power of the hydrogen bomb can be harnessed. The temperatures of 5 million degrees centigrade have been measured. So the Harwell team can reproduce the boundless energy of the solar system. A man-made sun with all its human benefits. An endless supply of light, heat and power.
The year was 1958, and not a great deal has been heard of Zeta since, because frankly, it didn't work as well as we'd hoped. Zeta was a nuclear experiment aimed at getting atoms to release energy not by fission, by splitting, as in today's nuclear power stations, but by colliding and fusing inside a donut-shaped vessel called a torus. Now, scientists haven't given up. 22 years after Zeta, a team is still working on the same principle, this time at Culham, using a Russian design and the best resources of Western Europe. Because if it could be made to work, a fusion reactor offers two big advantages over the traditional fission design. The potential dangers of radioactivity are considerably less, and the bulk of its fuel is readily available.
Here at Culham, we have an example of European cooperation in a technology that's still sufficiently in its infancy to have avoided many of the problems of world politics. Indeed, the Russian concept, which the designers here have adopted, has also been taken on board by the Japanese and by the Americans. And it's not difficult to understand the international interest in this technology. A 2-gigawatt power station using the fusion system which will be tested here will in one day consume 2 kilograms of a trace element called lithium and several thousand buckets of nothing more than seawater. Whilst in the same time, a conventional coal-burning power station like the one 2 or 3 fields from here at Didcot would consume 18,000 tons of coal. When it's completed, this will be the center of the torus, a donut-shaped, totally contained reactor vessel in which scientists will be able to recreate the conditions very much as they are right now on the sun. Though because the torus will be a good deal smaller than that heavenly body, the temperatures down here will have to be a good deal higher, something in the region of 100 million degrees centigrade, right where I'm standing now. This enormous temperature will set up reactions which will produce heat. The heat in turn will be passed on to help generate electricity. But this first torus will be used simply to investigate the problems of creating and sustaining such high temperatures.
Fusion reactions only happen in what's called a plasma, a gas that is so hot that the atoms are separated into negative electrons and positively charged nuclei. Now, these nuclei repel each other. But to produce energy, they need to collide and fuse together. That's why the plasma has to be so hot, to get those particles moving fast enough to overcome their natural electrical repulsion. They have to be at a temperature of about 100 million degrees. All very well in principle, but how on earth do you contain a gas that is some 10 times hotter than the center of the sun? Well, the electrical charge of those particles may make them repel each other, but it also means they're subject to this force, magnetism. Here in the studio, we've generated a plasma. It's contained in this glass vessel, and surrounding it are 2 electromagnets. What we're going to demonstrate by lowering the light so that you can see the gas glowing inside the containment vessel is the effect of the magnetic field produced by the electromagnets on that gas. There's the plasma, on goes the field, and immediately the plasma is contained. It's pinched, it's squeezed into a particular shape by the magnetic field. Of course, the plasma is still managing to leak out at each end of this demonstration unit, so to lose the leaky ends, they've made the plasma vessel circular, a ring-shaped torus. Here, the blue plasma is contained by white magnetic field lines. And this is where Zeta went wrong. Its plasma was unstable. It developed kinks and bulges, dispersing all the precious energy needed to start fusion. To overcome that problem, the Russian design uses a more powerful magnetic field around the plasma itself, forcing it back towards the center. And that is why the scientists hope JET, as it's now called, will work. But it is a complicated technology. And even if it does work, we won't be using fusion electricity for a long time. Indeed, it's as well to remember that it took the 10 European countries paying for the project 2 years simply to decide where to build it.
Not that that debate is having any effect on what's happening here at Culham. This site is bang on schedule for a 1983 startup. Though it's likely to be the turn of the century before anybody sees any electricity generated using the fusion process. Apart from its low running costs, this system offers other beguiling possibilities. Although this whole area will one day be radioactive, the system itself produces no radioactive waste fuel. Because the plasmas and the high temperatures are so difficult to sustain, should anything ever go wrong here, the system will shut itself down automatically. In fact, there are people working on the JET project who believe that if they can make this system operate, the world will have at its disposal nuclear technology with considerably less impact on the environment than the system we're being forced to use at the moment.
At this time of the year, when the grass is far from its best, cows need a supplement of hay. But hay can never be a perfect substitute for grass. And grass grown for hay uses up land that could be used more profitably by the farmer. In some parts of the world, this has to go on all the year round, because no grass grows at all, unless the farmers invest in this, the bovine version of Meals on Wheels. This strange contraption depends on a very basic ingredient: water. 150 gallons of it, to which you add calcium, phosphate, nitrates, and several other ingredients. That's used for watering what is basically a mobile field. You have to sprinkle seeds on a tray, and it can be rye, barley, or oats, and then these seeds are grown hydroponically, which is without soil, a technique which has been used before in horticulture, but never before down on the farm. The trays of seeds then have to go right up on the top shelf. After 24 hours, you start to see tiny shoots coming out, and then day by day, the grass grows longer and longer, until 7 days later, you have this luscious grass, only 7 days from seed to feed. And this grass machine can grow 1/2 ton a day. That's possible because this is the perfect grass-growing environment. Fluorescent bulbs provide the ideal lighting, and a temperature control unit keeps all of this at a constant 19 degrees centigrade, 24 hours a day. And every 6 hours, the chemically treated water in the tank is turned into this artificial rain that the seeds need to grow into this grass. But I can't stand the wet, so I'm going to beat a hasty retreat. I'm glad to be out of there. But at least this rain containing nutrients does its job well, because that machine produces enough grass to feed 50 cows. The machine's already been a success in desert areas for obvious reasons. But no one yet knows, come on cows, come and get it. Nobody yet knows if British farmers will be enthusiastic about it. They are, after all, a traditional lot. But the way the cows on this farm are enjoying it, it seems obvious that they believe that the grass is greener when it doesn't grow in a field.
In Britain today, we're drinking nearly twice as much alcohol per head as we did 20 years ago. And according to a report in this week's British Medical Journal, one study in the Midlands showed that 4 times as many people now suffer from severe alcoholic liver damage. And that's just the liver. Separate research going on in London is showing doctors how much damage drink can do to your brain. because heavy drinking can literally make your brain grow older, faster than the rest of you. Well, have a look at this. It's a cross-section of a well-preserved human brain, perfectly formed, a good colour, and you can see how densely packed it is. All of that is brain matter. And you can also see how perfectly symmetrical the two halves of the brain are on either side of this join. Now, if doctors had taken a brain scan using X-rays of that man's brain while he was still alive, this is what it probably would have looked like. This, in fact, is the brain scan of a man who's alive and healthy. The white area is bone, the grey area is healthy brain tissue, and the darker, almost black areas are natural brain fluid. And in fact, you can barely pick out the join, runs there down the middle, of the two halves. But compare that with the scan of an alcoholic over here, and there's a marked difference. The most striking thing is the increase in all of these black areas. Again, that's natural brain fluid, and the reason you can see so much more of it is because there's less brain. This brain has actually shrunk as a direct result of drinking a great deal of alcohol. And you can see as well, the gap between the two halves has widened considerably. Over here we've got another scan of the same brain from lower down, and there the contrast is even more dramatic. Now that's the brain of a living alcoholic. He's 44 years old. If a doctor who didn't know that man's case history had a look at that scan, he'd probably say it was the brain of someone getting on for 70. Because that kind of shrinking is exactly what happens when you grow to a ripe old age. Well, in that case, there's nothing wrong with it. It's perfectly natural. But in this alcoholic's case, the effect of drink is to make him old 25 years too soon. Now, the technique of brain scanning isn't new, but this is the first time it's ever been used in Britain to try and find out the extent of brain damage in alcoholics. And doctors at the Institute of Psychiatry in London, who've been carrying out these tests, have come up, surprisingly, with some very encouraging findings. For instance, it had been feared that brain damage, like the one we've seen, was irreversible. In fact, in some cases, tests show that after a steady period of drying out or stopping drinking, the brain actually starts to fill out again. Now, that's only a partial recovery, but for alcoholics fighting hard to give up drink, it's encouraging news. And for the rest of us who suspect we may be drinking too much, well, perhaps pictures like this serve as a warning too.
Do you remember this, or rather, do you remember something like this we showed you a few weeks ago? Watch. This is one of those sprays that contains particularly penetrating water repellent. And we're showing you this one because it's a fascinating example of just how competitive this line of technology has become. In most of these formulae, the important ingredient is a chemical containing long-chain molecules. Now, one end of each chain has a particular affinity for metal, the other end has fatty water-resistant properties. The net result, the molecules push the water aside and then stick to the metal, forming a microscopically thin layer which remains long after the water has been dispersed. Now, I said this was a competitive business. Well, the manufacturers of this particular formula, convinced no doubt that they've got it absolutely right, have been looking for the ultimate demonstration of its powers, and they have come up with this. 5 days from now, they intend to drive this car along the bed of the River Thames, completely submerged with its vital electrical components, protected by the spray and the distributor sealed. What else have they had to do? Well, they've had to add a couple of pipes round the back, one to ensure that the exhaust is clear of the water line, the other to ensure there's a constant air supply to the carburettor. Here in the boot, the vehicle will be carrying a pound or two of nautical ballast to make sure that it doesn't float. And the big question is it likely to work? Well, here's a sneak preview. Water, if you'd be so kind, sir. A quick shower in the Tomorrow's World studio, and while we're drenching the engine, note that there is no windscreen. This is because all those who drive cars under rivers will know well. It's easy if you have the car as full of water as the area outside. The poor old driver, of course, will have to wear a frogman's suit. Not so sure we're actually doing a good job here, so we'll add a bit for good measure. Let's see.
Not enough.
Well, why should I be solely responsible for this? On goes the water. While you're doing that, ladies and gents, let's see if she's going to start. Here we go. Oh, a happy result. Lights, all seems to be going well. Well, I can't say for certain that she'll perform as well next week when she's under the Thames, but she's passed the first hurdle. Better luck than I had last week trying to start a car, but then the technology is a little bit younger. Next week, then, we'll be back with another Tomorrow's World, and until then, from all of us, good night to you.